New records show Kansas City reversed thousands of earnings tax collections cases annually, even as officials dismiss concerns raised by a KCTV5 investigation last month. And the work from our Zach Summers continues. He's taking us behind the story once again with the latest on this issue. Thank you so much, Zach, for coming back and chatting with me again. We were just talking about this several weeks ago, the first version of this story.
Yeah, so this is part two of our initial story, which aired last month, where we essentially exposed or uncovered that the city sends tens of thousands of people to collections over the earnings tax, but it had no way of tracking when it got it wrong. And so after that report, a lot of people reached out, and via email, voicemail, messages on Facebook saying, this sounds very familiar, this has happened to me, what can we do about it? And you know, that just led to our second follow-up, which let's watch it and then let's talk about it.
All right, let's get to it.
So the statute of limitations would have run in 2024.
Michelle Stark-Kaufman has spent decades as a corporate attorney. She knows how the law works, including deadlines cities have to collect debt.
Every cause of action has its own statute of limitations.
It has to be paid for somehow.
When the longtime Kansas City resident saw our investigation last month into Kansas City's earnings tax collections, she says it sounded familiar.
I thought, same thing happened to me.
In February, she received a notice from a debt collector claiming she owed the city more than $1,400 tied to a 2018 audit assessment.
I couldn't figure out why I was getting something so far after the fact.
Michelle believes she paid years ago and questioned whether the city could legally collect a debt that old. She disputed the claim in writing.
To just receive a notice that you owe this tax and here's the penalty and interest without an explanation as to how it was calculated or what was wrong with your return, it makes it kind of impossible to know, is this right or is this not right?
In her letter, Michelle said it was the first notice she recalled and that the city shouldn't be able to collect unless it could prove it contacted her before the legal deadline.
I sent that letter in February and I haven't heard a response at this point.
Her complaint mirrors other taxpayers who contacted KCTV5. Complaints of surprise bills, unresolved disputes, and accounts sent to collections, leaving some worried about credit damage. In one case, a city finance manager acknowledged in writing that some statements were never mailed. How this system works matters because it applies to you. I filed several sunshine requests on how the city handles earnings tax collections. The finance department provided internal checklists, but had no vendor scorecards or oversight meeting minutes beyond its contracts. After repeated follow-up, the department produced a report showing how often referrals were later changed or reversed, data it previously said it didn't track. The year-by-year summary shows from 2019 to 2024, Kansas City received as many as 300,000 returns in a year. Of those, between 7 to 9% were sent to collections. Using the city's own counts, roughly 15 to 33% of those referrals later changed status, marked reversed or amended after referral. That's thousands of cases every year. The report does not explain why each referral changed, but finance noted that status changes can occur for different reasons, including updated taxpayer documentation or corrections such as payments applied to the wrong account or tax year. KCTV5 also obtained internal emails showing how city staff responded to our original reporting. One suggestion, offer a competing station an exclusive interview with questions provided in advance. Another, cut off on-camera interviews with KCTV5 entirely. Notably absent from those emails, any discussion of a review of the collections process. In a separate message, Assistant City Manager Tammy Queen wrote, "For what it's worth, we don't believe that there's an issue. This is standard operating procedure." The city's own data tells a different story. I asked Mayor Quentin Lucas whether those numbers warrant a closer review of the system.
What I would suggest is, and frankly what I think City Council asked after your reporting earlier this spring, was to say, how do we make sure we have the resources that we don't have these mistakes?
The mayor says council approved funding for additional tax auditors in March with the goal of catching problems. But when KCTV5 previously asked finance for any internal process audits or reviews, we were told the tax auditor position audits potential tax liabilities. The city auditor would be the oversight for an e-tax or revenue process, and no such audit has been completed.
We have a director of finance, we have a revenue director. It is very much within their authority to make sure that the system actually functions and works well. That is a first step.
But given their position on that,
Right.
would you commit to an audit of the process of the e-tax system to ensure that it's working properly?
Yeah, here's my deal. I don't think I'm going to give a cop-out for someone to not do their job.
The mayor stopped short of calling for an independent audit. He says he does support more internal review and wants clarification on what checks are currently in place.
I'm not here saying the city's perfect, and indeed some of our answers absolutely aren't. But I think what I'm saying is that most people are trying to get it done right.
I don't know how they calculated this amount.
Michelle says she still hasn't heard back from the city. She supports the earnings tax, but says the data raises questions about how the city handles these cases.
You know, we all make mistakes. You know, I can't tell you how many times I send something out that isn't quite right, you know. Hopefully you get a chance to fix it.
Following our reporting, Finance told us it's making changes, beginning an annual review of how its collections vendor performs and planning to use its tax software to better track what happens after accounts are sent to collections. In Kansas City, Zach Summers, KCTV5 News.
Okay, Zach, there are so many directions that we can go right now.
Yeah.
I will say the primary thing that sticks out to me is what she just said, and then your previous interviewer, that these are people who support the tax.
Right.
You know, they just want to make sure that it's done correctly.
Yeah, I mean, the earnings tax is something that if you live or work in Kansas City, you're going to pay, with some exceptions. It is a large chunk of the city's budget. And people understand the importance surrounding it. But we found that the city's not always getting it right. And in our initial reporting, they acknowledged that they didn't track errors or reversals or amendments. And that seemed a little problematic. And that's what we highlighted in our first report. And then in our second report, we ended up getting the data that shows, yes, in fact, the city is not getting it right. And in the last 5 years, it's affected thousands of people every year. You know, the story was never, part one or part two, was never meant to, like, attack the system. It was meant to question whether the processes in place or the checks and balances in place, the oversight that's in place, is it working properly? Not just for the city, but for taxpayers. Because, I mean, yeah, so in the grand scheme of things, we're talking about maybe a small amount of money in the grand scheme of things.
Right.
But for the everyday taxpayer, this money
$1,400 is a lot.
matters. I mean, this is hundreds of dollars for one taxpayer we talked to. In her case, it was $1,400. Like, that's not chump change for the everyday person. So knowing that the city has, you know, safeguards in place to make sure that they're getting it right off the bat, and not just relying on taxpayers to prove that, hey, I did get it right. You know, that's what the reporting was meant for. That's why I decided to do this story. And you're right, there are a lot of elements in this story. One, I'll just start with the data, the new data. This is data we asked for initially. We wanted this data initially. Again, the city said it didn't track this information. And that we had to file several public records requests. I mean, I filed at least close to a dozen, if not just under a dozen, sunshine requests, trying to get the city to give us this information. I mean, and I would word it differently when they would say, you know, exemption or denied, and trying to get them to like give me something. And they kept leaning on taxpayer confidentiality and attorney-client privilege. And that's understandable. I understood that. But we were asking for like aggregate information. We wanted numbers. We weren't looking to identify taxpayers. We were just saying, hey, can you look at your systems and get us these numbers so we can look at it ourselves and see if
Because
there's
the
something
taxpayers,
going.
they identified themselves by reaching out to you.
Yeah, it's the one
Yeah.
that we highlighted in our reporting, but we wanted the data. We wanted the numbers. And the cities, the folks in finance and even their city attorneys at one point got involved and was like, we've given you everything that we are legally obligated to give.
Yeah.
And so I remember having a conversation with our news director, and I told Josh, I'm like, I'm going back and forth with the city on just trying to get like numbers, and I don't know what to do, and so, or I knew what to do. I was going to keep fighting for it, but he's like, we have lawyers too. So let's see what our lawyers think, and our lawyers ended up drafting a letter to the city's FOIA folks, basically saying like, this is what we're asking for, and this is what the law says. Can you provide what we're asking for without giving away taxpayer identification and those kind of things? We were asking for what we believe was public information, and sure enough, April 28th, weeks after we had filed some of those FOIAs, the city manually produced this report showing us the numbers that we had been asking for. And they say in their letter to me, we're doing this in an effort to be transparent and for educational purposes. So that was the challenge of getting the data. But the data showed that, okay, there might be some cracks that, might need addressing. And so then you have, I really appreciate the mayor sitting down and talking with us, because our goal in all of this was to just get some accountability, get some transparencies, to really like nail home the oversight side of this. And in our sit down with the mayor, he pointed to the tax auditor's role in finance and how the budget allowing for more auditors will hopefully catch some of these problems before they get too far gone. And that stood out to me because in a previous public records request, I had asked finance for any sort of oversight, any sort of reviews of the process to make sure that it's working properly. And you saw in the story, they said, well, that's really not our role. Our role is taxpayer liability. And if you want to see if what we're doing is right, then that would fall on the auditor. And the mayor made it very clear, no, that's not right. Like, they should be making sure that they're getting it right. And look, we all, and I'm so happy with Michelle's last bite, because it's like, we all make mistakes. We do. And nobody's saying that the system should be perfect, but it's a matter of like, look at the process and see if there's maybe something that you could do to prevent some of this on the back end, catch it on the front end, so you're not dealing with this on the back end, which is what taxpayers want. We just want an efficient system that's working properly, not just for the city, but for us, as taxpayers. And so there's that. And then there are the emails.
Okay. Yes. And I want to ask you really quickly, before we run out of time, seeing the amount of requests or just complaints that you receive from other taxpayers, talk about, as an investigator, the importance of pushing through the challenge that you had to deal with to get this information, because, after getting the denials or the runarounds, it could have been easy to just be like, okay, they're not giving it to us.
Exactly.
Let's move on.
And that is sort of the easy thing. And some would argue that's what they want you to do. Right. But it's our job to keep pressing, especially when you feel like you're on to something, like you're like, these responses aren't really lining up. You know, there's more to it. And looking at the emails from City Hall, I will say I was a little disheartened by what I read in those emails, because from the get-go, when you look back to our first story and we sat down with the deputy manager of finance, which, mind you, we made it very clear we wanted to speak with the finance director, and if we couldn't speak to the finance director in our initial reporting, can we speak to someone who can speak to the collections referral process? And if you recall, they had us sit down with the deputy manager, and that interview didn't go the way that they wanted it to go. It didn't go the way we wanted it to go, because we walked away not really having any sort of real answers. And so the reason why I FOIA'd internal emails within City Hall surrounding that first report is because I wanted to know how City Hall responded. I wanted to know if there would be anything in there of them saying, let's look at the process. Let's see if there's something wrong. But it was literally like from the get-go, after our first interview from the first story with the deputy manager, this was a bait and switch. Like, he was unprofessional. Like, it was all these things attacking my character.
Yeah.
And there was nothing in the way of saying, like, well, maybe he might be onto something, or let's look into this. And then Tammy Queen, the assistant city manager, basically saying, like, this is standard operating procedure. And it was just kind of like, oh, so they aren't really taking this seriously, you know? And then to, you know, that suggestion about shopping the story to another station and providing questions, that came from the interim communications director, you know, like the person who oversees communication, and then to sort of like suggest to not do on-camera interviews and to reverse the damage, quote unquote, that I had caused, and that I was going down this rabbit hole. And it's like, I'm just doing my job, and I'm working on behalf of people who reached out to us, who feel like they're hitting a wall with City Hall.
And at the end of the day, the rabbit hole that you went down
led to action.
Exactly.
Led to action.
Exactly.
And that, you know, that is the big takeaway. And you know, we can talk all day long about what happened and what should have happened. What I care most about is finance telling me, look, we are now going to do something about it, you know? And I wish that was the answer initially. I wish the answer was, let's look into it. Let's see if there's something here. And if we find something, let's make some changes. And so to hear them say that they're going to like make those changes, you know, and they're going to do a better job of tracking trends so they can, you know, make sure that taxpayers and the city is both, that we're all being taken care of properly, or that the system is working the way it should. That's really what I care about most.
And that's what journalism is all about at the end of the day. That's why you take your time out to do the digging and request these FOIAs. I remember having a FOIA assignment in college. It was one of the hardest assignments I had.
Tough. It is tough.
It's not easy.
Public records requests are a challenge. And you know, if you're listening, do know that, like, as an everyday taxpayer, you can file these records requests too. You know, it takes some, you just got to keep at it sometimes, you know. Because and then if you don't know the law the right way, you know, sometimes you won't get the records that you necessarily want because an entity is hiding behind a certain section of the law, and so you just keep pressing. But you know, like you said, that's our job, and that's why we do what we do. And stories like this, you know, I hope they matter. I certainly, it was a challenge, and it's a challenge that I'm glad I took on.
Yes.
Because hopefully it makes a difference.
And I'm sure many people are grateful that you did it as well. I mean, even just the first installment of this story, the response that you received from people who are like, I have this problem too. Right. You know, so.
And that's what
it counts.
Made us go, okay, we have something. We have to follow up on this.
Yeah. Well, anything that you want to leave with viewers?
You know, if you have something you want us to investigate.
This is your guy.
I mean, I can't, you know, we never can promise that we're going to like be able to, get answers or that the story's going to turn out the way somebody wants to. But I always tell people I'm at least willing to listen. I'm at least willing to do some digging. And if it leads me somewhere, we'll go down that path.
All right. Got the job done.
Yeah.
Well, Arzak Summers, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back.